It was nearly 1 o'clock. I was feeling extremely hungry and went to a vegetarian restaurant. Restaurants of this type are to be found in various parts of London. During lunch hours in those days, London restaurants were not very crowded. There were about 3 or 4 people in the room. I chose a corner table, seated myself, and opened the newspaper. Soon the waitress came, took my order, and went away briskly and noiselessly. At that moment, I noticed that a young English girl of about 13 or 14 years was gazing at me. Her clothes betrayed her poverty. Her eyes were large and they had a sad expression. As she was going out, she asked the cashier in a low voice, "Is that gentleman an Indian?" "I think so," the cashier answered. The girl looked at me once more with a startled air and went out. It surprised me. Why? What was the matter? Her interest in me aroused my interest in her. When I had finished my lunch, I asked the waitress, "Do you know the girl who was sitting over there?" "No, sir. I notice she has lunch here on Saturdays. Saturday is payday. That is when she comes. She may not be able to afford lunch on other days. Perhaps she does not earn very much." I was moved by what she said. The curiosity I felt about the girl persisted. Why had she inquired about me? Who was the mysterious child? I kept thinking of her poverty stricken, sad, anxious figure. Could I help her in any way? The week passed. Saturday came again. I went to the same vegetarian restaurant once more. As I entered, I saw her sitting at the same table as before. She was eating. I went up to her and took the chair opposite hers, saying, "Good afternoon." "Good afternoon, sir." She responded hesitantly. By making one brief remark after another, I was able to start a conversation. At last, she asked, "Are you an Indian?" "Yes." "Excuse me, are you a vegetarian?" She wanted to know. "Why do you ask that?" "I have heard that most Indians are vegetarian." "Who told you that?" I asked. "My brother is in India, he's a soldier." "I'm not much of a vegetarian," I answered her question, "but I enjoy a vegetarian meal now and then." I learned that she lived with her old widowed mother in Lambeth. "Do you hear from your brother?" "We have not had a letter from him for a long time. My mother is very worried. People tell her that India is full of tigers and snakes and people get malaria and cholera. She is afraid something has happened to him." "Is it true, sir, that India is full of tigers and snakes?" "No," I smiled. "How could people live there if it were?" The girl sighed softly. "Mother says she would like to ask an Indian about these things, if she can find an Indian." The girl looked at me with eyes full of pleading. I understood how she felt. She wanted me to see her mother, but she did not have the courage to ask me to accompany her home. A keen desire to meet this poor, anxious mother took hold of me. I had not had the opportunity to visit an impoverished English home. I wished to see how the poor live in England, to know what they think. "Will you introduce me to your mother sometime? Would you like me to accompany you home? I can come someday." The girl's eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you so much," she said. "It is so kind of you. Can you come now?" "With pleasure." "Will it not interfere with anything else you have to do?" "No, not at all. This afternoon is entirely my own." The girl was delighted. We finished our lunch and got up together. As we walked, I asked her, "May I know your name?" "My name is Alice Margaret Clifford." "Oh, are you the Alice of Alice in Wonderland?" I joked. She was nonplussed. I had imagined every English girl read the incomparable book. "That is the name of a nice book," I explained. "Have not you read it?" "No, I have not read it." "If your mother permits me," I said, "I shall make a present of it to you." We chatted pleasantly and soon reached a telegraph office. "Let's wait for the Westminster bus here," I said. "Would you mind walking?" she asked. "Not at all," I answered, "if it is not difficult for you." "No, I walk home every day." This gave me the opportunity of asking her where she worked. I asked her, "Do you come this way often?" "Yes," she answered. "I work as a typist in the civil services stores. I come home this way every afternoon. Today is Saturday, so I'm off early. Let us walk along the embankment. It will be less crowded than the strand. I said, and taking her by the arm, guided her carefully across the street. The street known as the embankment runs along the north shore of the Thames. Do you usually go this way? I asked as we made our way along it. No, it is less crowded, it is true, but the people are dirtier. I go home by the Strand and Whitehall. The poor, unsophisticated girl had defeated me. This was not the first time the English sense of beauty had disarmed me. We approached Westminster Bridge. Shall I call you Miss Clifford or Alice? I'm not grown up yet. You may call me what you like. I'm usually called Maggie. She laughed. Are you very anxious to grow up? Yes. Tell me why? When I grow up, I shall be paid more for my work. My mother is old, she explained. Is the work you do to your liking? No, the work is very mechanical. I want work that will make me use my head, brain work like the work of a secretary. We cross the bridge and arrive in Lambeth. It is a poor neighborhood. If I ever become a secretary, Maggie said, I shall take my mother away from here. Why are you called by your second name instead of your first? I asked as we pushed through the crowd of ill dressed people. My mother's first name is also Alice, so my father called me by my second name, making it my nickname. Did your father call you Maggie or Maxie? When he was very affectionate, he called me Maxie. How did you know? Yes, yes, I answered, pretending to sound mysterious. We are Indians, you know. We know about the future and all kind of magic. That is what I have heard, she said. Indeed, I was surprised. What have you heard? I have heard that there are many people in India who have magical powers. They are called yogis, but you are not a yogi. How do you know that I am not a yogi, Maggie? Yogis do not eat meat. Is that why you asked me in the beginning whether I am vegetarian or not? She smiled without answering. We had reached a narrow doorway. Maggie took a thin latch key out of her pocket and opened the door. She entered and said, Please come in. When I was inside, Maggie closed the door. She went to the foot of the stairs and, raising her voice a little, called, Mother, where are you? I'm in the kitchen, child. The answer came from the basement. Come down. Maggie looked at me questioningly. Do you mind? Not in the least. Come on, I said. Together we descended the stairs to the kitchen. Mother, said Maggie from the doorway, an Indian gentleman has come to see you. Where is he? The old woman asked eagerly. With a smile, I stepped into the kitchen behind Maggie. She introduced us. This is Mr. Gupta, mother, she said. Mr. Gupta, my mother. How do you do? I said and held out my hand. Excuse me, my hands, she said, holding them out for me to see. They were covered with flour. Today is Saturday, she explained. I'm making cakes. People will come to buy them this evening. They will be sold on the streets tonight. This is the way we make our living. Lots of trouble. Saturday night is a time of festivity in poor neighborhoods. All sorts of things are sold from countless lighted pushcarts. The streets are more crowded than on any other day. Saturday is the day the poor are able to spend a little, for they receive their weekly wages. Ingredients for cake making, flour, sugar, fat, raisins, eggs, and so forth, were set out in readiness upon the dresser. Severely freshly baked cakes in tins were also there. Sitting in such a poor kitchen will not be very pleasant for you, will it? Mrs. Clifford said. I have almost finished my work. Maggie, take him into the sitting room. I'll come in a minute. No, no, I protested. I can sit here well enough. You make delicious cakes, I must say. Mrs. Clifford thanked me with a smile. Mother makes good toffee also. Will you try some? Maggie opened a cupboard and took out a tin. I ate several toffees and praised them. What kind of a country is India, sir? Asked Mrs. Clifford as she resumed her cooking. A beautiful country, safe to live in. Certainly, but not cold like this country. It is hot. Are not there too many snakes and tigers? Don't they kill people? Don't believe that, I laughed. Snakes and tigers keep to the jungles. They get killed themselves if they come too close to places where people live. And fevers? In some places in India, there is more illness than in others. It is not the same everywhere. nor is it the same all the year round. My son is in the Punjab, he's a soldier. What kind of a place is the Punjab? The Punjab is a fine place. There is little fever there. I'm glad to hear this, Mrs. Clifford said. She was finished with her baking. Maggie, she said, take Mr. Gupta upstairs. I'll wash my hands and bring tea. Maggie showed me the way to their sitting room and I followed. The furniture was cheap and there was not much of it. The carpet was old and torn in places, but everything was extremely clean. Maggie drew curtains back and opened the windows. There was a glass bookcase. I stood in front of it. Mrs. Clifford came in carrying the tea tray a few minutes later. All trace of the kitchen had vanished from her person. As we drank tea, I talked about India. Mrs. Clifford showed me a photograph of her son. It had been taken before he left. His name was Francis or Frank. Maggie brought out a book of pictures he had sent her for her birthday. There were many pictures of Shimla and the surrounding mountain country. On the inside page was written to Maggie on her birthday from her loving brother Frank. Maggie, said Mrs. Clifford, show Mr. Gupta the ring. Has your brother sent you a ring? I asked her. Let me see what kind of a ring it is. It is a magic ring, Maggie explained. A yogi gave it to Frank. She brought it and asked, can you see the past and future in it? I had heard a lot about crystal gazing. A crystal was set in the ring. I took it up and examined it. When Frank sent the ring, Mrs. Clifford said, he wrote that if you concentrate on a distant person as you gaze into it, you will be able to see him and what he is doing. The yogi told Frank that Maggie and I have concentrated upon it again and again because we have not had any news from Frank for a long time, but we have not been able to see anything. Why don't you try? You are an Indian, you may be able to do it. I realized that superstition was not confined to India. I did not have the heart to tell the mother and daughter that the ring was nothing much brass with a piece of ordinary glass stuck into it. They believed their Frank had sent them a new and miraculous thing from a distant land, from a dream world. How could I shatter their faith? Urged by Mrs. Clifford and Maggie, I took the ring in my hand and stared at it intensely for a long time. I cannot see anything, I exclaimed at last, giving up. Mother and daughter were disappointed. To change the subject, I said, here is a violin. It is yours? Is not it, Maggie? Yes, Mrs. Clifford answered. Maggie plays quite well. Maggie, please, play something for us. Oh, mother. Maggie looked at her protesting. Maggie, I pleaded. Please play something. I'm very fond of the violin. I have a sister at home about your age. She used to play for me. The way I play is not at all worth listening to, Maggie said. After some persuasion, she played a folk tune and then a minor classic. We became good friends. I took Maggie and her mother to the theater. We saw The Merchant of Venice. 3 months passed. I visited Maggie and her mother several times at their home and took Maggie once to see the zoo. She rode the elephant Indian Raja like all other boys and girls. How delighted she was! But no news had come from her brother. Urged by Mrs. Clifford, I went to India House one day and made inquiries. I was told the regiment to which Frank belonged was fighting on the northwest frontier. Mrs. Clifford became extremely worried when she heard it. One day I received a postcard from Maggie. She wrote, dear Mr. Gupta, my mother is very ill. I have not been able to go to work for a week. We shall be extremely grateful if you take the trouble to come to see us. Maggie, I had told the family with whom I lived with Maggie and her mother. I spoke of the letter at breakfast. My hostess said, when you go, take some money with you. The girl has not been able to go to work for a week. She has not received any pay. It is probably that they are hard up. After breakfast, I took some money and set out for Lambeth. I knocked at the door. Maggie opened it. She was looking very pale. Her eyes were hollow and wrinkled. Oh, thank you, Mr. Gupta, she exclaimed when she saw me. It is so kind of you. How's your mother, Maggie? I asked. She is sleeping now. Her condition is very serious. The doctor says it is aggravated by her anxiety for Frank. There is no news from him yet. She may not live. I tried to console Maggie. Maggie controlled herself with an effort and said, I have a request to make to you, Mr. Gupta. What is it, Maggie? I asked. Come into the sitting room and I'll tell you, she answered. We tiptoed carefully into the sitting room, lest the sound of our footsteps should disturb the sick woman. I turned when I reached the center of the room and remained standing there. What is it, Maggie? I repeated my question. Maggie gazed up into my face with pleading eyes. I waited. Then she covered her face with her hands and wept silently. I was in a fix. What could I say to console this child? Her brother was fighting on the frontier. Only God knew whether he was alive or dead. Her mother was the only person she had on earth. If she lost her, what would happen? Where in London could this girl on the threshold of adolescence go? I pulled her hands away from the face. Maggie, tell me what you wish me to do. If there is anything I can do to help you, I shall not hesitate. Mr. Gupta, the girl said, I do not know what you will think of the request I am going to make. Please forgive me if it is very, very wrong. What is it? Tell me, please. All day yesterday, mother kept saying that if Mr. Gupta would come and gaze into the crystal, he might learn something about Frank. If only he would come, she said. That is why I wrote to you. If you want me to try once more, go and bring me the ring, Maggie. Of course, I'll do it. But if you don't see anything again this time, I understood what Maggie meant. I was silent. Mr. Gupta, I have read in books that Indians love truth. If you could bring yourself to tell mother only once, after looking into the crystal, that Frank is all right, that he is alive, will it be too much of a lie? Will it be very, very wrong? As she spoke, tears streamed from her eyes. I thought it over and decided to do it. Please, Maggie, don't cry. Where is the ring? Let me take a good look at this time. If I do not see anything, I shall do as you suggest. Maggie brought me the ring. I took it and said, see if your mother is awake. She said, I have told her you are here. May I see her now? Please come. I approached the mother's bedside. The ring was in my hand. Wishing her a good morning, I said, Mrs. Clifford, your son is alive. He is well. The old woman raised her head a little off the pillow. Did you see that in the crystal? She asked. Yes, Mrs. Clifford. I answered without any hesitation. I have seen it. Her head dropped back. Tears of happiness fell from her eyes. She whispered faintly, God bless you, God bless you. Mrs. Clifford recovered. It was almost time for me to return to India. I wished to go to Lambeth to say goodbye to Maggie and her mother, but the family was in mourning. Frank had been killed in the fighting on the frontier. A month before, Maggie had sent me a card with a black border. I calculated from the date and found that Frank had been dead some days when I told his mother he was alive and well. I felt ashamed to face Mrs. Clifford, so I wrote a letter to them announcing my departure and bidding them goodbye. The morning of my last day in London dawned. I was to leave that night. As I was breakfasting with the family, there was a knock at the door. A minute or two later, the maid came in and announced, Please, Mr. Gupta, Miss Clifford has come to see you. My breakfast was unfinished. Maggie had come to say goodbye, lest she should be late for office because of me. I took permission of my hostess and got up from the table. Maggie was standing in the hall. She was wearing black. I took her into the adjoining library and made her sit down. Are you leaving today? She asked. Yes, Maggie, today is the day of my departure. How long will it take you to reach your country? A little more than 2 weeks. In what part of the country do you live? She wanted to know. I have entered the Punjab Civil Service. I shall not know exactly where I am posted until I arrive there. Is the frontier very far from there? No, not very. Frank is buried at the Fort Monroe near Dera Ghazi Khan. The girl's eyes filled with tears as she spoke. When I go to that part of the country, I shall visit your brother's grave and write to you. Won't it be troublesome for you or inconvenient? Maggie asked. Why should it be? Dera Ghazi Khan is not very far from where I shall be. It will certainly be possible for me to go there some day. I'll write and tell you about it. Maggie's face filled with gratitude. As she thanked me, her voice choked. She took a shilling out of her pocket and put it down on the table in front of me, saying, Please buy flowers with this shilling when you go and lay them on my brother's grave for me. Overwhelmed, I lowered my eyes. The child had earned the shilling with so much toil. I felt like returning it to her, explaining that in our country flowers grow in great profusion. But I reconsidered. Why should I deprive her of the joy this sacrifice would give her? All that this shilling could have given her, she was foregoing for love of her brother. The joy of doing it was beyond all price. The grief in her heart would be eased a little. What good would it do to deprive her of it? I picked up the shilling. Maggie stood up. How can I thank you? She said, now is time for me to go to work. Goodbye. Remember to write. I got up and took her hand in mine. Goodbye, Maggie. God bless you. I sat and pressed her hand to my lips. Maggie left. I wiped a tear or two from my eyes and went upstairs to pack my bags.